The cameras were rolling. The lights were blindingly bright, bouncing off the polished wooden desks and the glossy backdrop behind the stage. Millions were watching at home, but inside the packed hearing room it felt like a pressure cooker. Every eye was fixed on the man at the center of it all, the politician who had built his career not on truth, but on carefully crafted half-statements and twisted narratives. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone who thought he had rehearsed every possibility. His lips curled into a smirk, one of those smug expressions that doesn't just say "I'm confident," but "I've already won." And the audience noticed it. Some whispered, others rolled their eyes. But his supporters clapped politely, as if the smirk itself was a sign of dominance. The moderator's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Senator, can you explain the discrepancy in your statements from last year compared to today?" A simple question, or at least it seemed simple. The politician chuckled, leaned forward, and began his performance. "Well, you see, the media loves to twist my words. They take one sentence out of context, they spin it, and suddenly the truth looks like a lie. But let me be clear. I've always stood for what's right." His voice was smooth, rehearsed, and wrapped in that fake sincerity that comes only from years of practice. He waved his hand dismissively as if swatting away the question like an annoying fly. And the smirk widened. For a moment, it worked. The audience laughed nervously, a few clapped again. He looked untouchable. The cameras caught every angle of his grin, every calculated pause. But what he did not know, what no one in that room yet realized, was that this was the beginning of his undoing. Because somewhere in the stack of questions waiting for him, there was one he had not prepared for. One that would shatter the illusion. One that would expose just how twisted his truths really were. And when that question came, his smirk wouldn't just fade, it would collapse. But for now, the show went on. The moderator nodded politely, pretending to accept his answer, and then lobbed a follow-up. "So, if you've always been consistent, why did you state on record something entirely different last September?" The politician's smirk faltered, just slightly. It was the blink of an eye, a crack in the mask, but it was enough to make the audience lean forward in their seats. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and launched into another carefully crafted spin. "Context matters, and what I said last September was addressing a completely different situation. You can't compare apples to oranges." A safe answer. Or so he thought. Narrator-style commentary slipped into the silence. And this is where arrogance becomes dangerous. When someone believes they've outsmarted the room, they forget that truth doesn't need to shout. It just waits for the right question. The camera zoomed closer. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The tension was building, not because he had given an answer, but because his answer felt hollow. And people can always tell when something doesn't add up. The hero of this story hadn't spoken yet. They sat quietly across the room, taking notes, waiting. Unlike the politician, they weren't smirking. They weren't grandstanding. They were patient, calm, almost surgical in their silence. They knew what was coming. The politician, meanwhile, continued to bask in the spotlight. He raised his eyebrows, leaned back again, and delivered one more jab for the cameras. "You know, if I had $1 for every time the media tried to trip me up, I'd be richer than all of them combined." Laughter, applause from a small group in the back, but mixed into that sound was something else. The quiet murmur of unease. Because beneath the surface of his confidence, the cracks were already forming. And the audience could feel it. The narrator's voice once again cut through the noise, speaking not just about the man, but to the viewers at home. Have you ever seen someone so sure of themselves only to realize they've built their house of cards too high? That's what you're about to witness, and trust me, you'll remember the moment it all collapses. The room quieted as the next question was announced. A hush fell over the crowd. The hero glanced up from their notes, eyes sharp, ready, and with that, the trap began to close. But the one who did not see it coming, the one who thought this was just another performance, was the man still smirking. The politician. The man who believed he could twist the truth forever. The man who was about to learn that twisted truths always snap under pressure. And as the lights glared down, As the cameras tightened their focus, and as millions waited for what came next, the real story was only just beginning. Cliffhanger. Because the question that would unravel him wasn't about last September. It was about yesterday. And when it came, even he knew there was no way out. The room was tense, every shuffle of paper and click of a pen amplified by the silence. The cameras held steady, broadcasting to millions who had no idea they were about to witness something unforgettable. The politician adjusted his suit jacket and crossed one leg over the other, a gesture of forced ease. His eyes darted around the room, as if to check whether the audience was still with him. And yes, many still were. That's the power of performance. People want to believe confidence equals truth. But confidence is a fragile mask. And masks always slip when the right pressure is applied. The moderator, calm and professional, cleared his throat. Senator, I'd like to ask about a statement you made yesterday. You said, on record, that you had never supported the controversial bill. But we have footage from last year where you not only praised it, but called it, and I quote, a necessary step for the country. How do you explain that? There it was. The question. The kind of question that lands like a hammer, leaving no wiggle room. The politician's smirk froze in place. His jaw tightened. He blinked quickly, twice. And for the first time that night, he seemed unsure. The audience noticed immediately. A collective hush swept the room, followed by scattered murmurs. Some leaned forward, eager for the takedown. Others crossed their arms defensively, already preparing excuses for him. Narrator commentary layered over the silence. This is the sound of truth closing in. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet. Relentless, like footsteps in a hallway. And he knew in this moment that the footsteps were getting closer. The politician leaned toward the microphone. Well, context is everything. What I said last year was addressing a different aspect of the bill. Yesterday's comment reflected where we are now in a changed political climate. You can't take a single phrase and twist it into something it's not. But it was weak. Too weak. Even his supporters knew it. The words tumbled out quickly without the smooth rhythm of his usual rehearsed lines. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a thin, nervous smile that didn't reach his eyes. The hero across the room finally lifted their gaze. They had been waiting silently, methodically, for this exact moment. Their calm presence stood in stark contrast to the politician's unraveling composure. The cameras cut to the audience. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. Another shook her head slowly, as if she had just witnessed something irreversible. And the narrator's voice pierced through the tension again. Do you see it? The moment when power slips. It's not always a dramatic crash. Sometimes, it's just a pause, a hesitation, a stumble in words. And that's when people realize they've been listening to a performance, not the truth. The moderator pressed. So, Senator, are you saying your own words, recorded on video, played back for the public, don't mean what they seem to mean? The trap tightened. The politician shifted in his chair. His hand gripped the table. I'm saying my words have been taken out of context, twisted. But the moderator cut in, sharp as a blade. Twisted by who? The footage shows you speaking clearly, directly, without any editing. Are you suggesting you did not say those words? The silence after that question was deafening. The audience gasped audibly. The camera zoomed in, catching the sweat beginning to gather on his forehead. The narrator broke in, almost whispering to the viewer. And this is where arrogance collapses. Because when you've built your defense on the idea that truth can be bent at will, the one thing you cannot survive is proof. The politician swallowed hard. He forced a chuckle, but it came out dry and brittle. Look, I don't expect the media, or even you, to always understand nuance. That's the problem with gotcha questions. They don't reflect reality. They just try to trap people. There it was, the word, trap. But it was too late. He had admitted it. He wasn't confident anymore. He was defensive. And the audience could smell fear. The hero's pen tapped against the desk. Slowly, deliberately, they leaned toward their microphone. The entire room seemed to tilt toward them, waiting. "Senator!" The hero's voice was calm, measured, but carrying a weight that filled the chamber. "No one twisted your words. You said what you said, and the American people deserve the truth, not spin. If your stance has changed, then say so. If you've misled, then admit it. But stop blaming everyone else for your contradictions." The crowd erupted. Gasps, scattered applause, murmurs rising into a swell. The cameras caught every angle, the hero's steady gaze, the politician's faltering smile, the audience's electricity. The narrator's voice swelled with the moment. And there it is, the strike. Not loud, not cruel, just honest. And that honesty hit harder than any insult ever could. The politician's eyes darted toward the cameras. He realized millions were watching, not just his answer, but his reaction. And reactions reveal more than words ever do. For the first time, the smirk was truly gone. He looked trapped. And as the room buzzed with energy, as the audience leaned forward for what would come next, the narrator left viewers hanging on the edge of suspense. But the trap wasn't fully sprung yet, because the next revelation, the one no one expected, would do more than corner him. It would destroy the story he'd been telling for years. The air was electric. The audience wasn't just watching anymore. They were leaning in, caught in the gravity of what was unfolding. Something bigger than a debate was happening here. This wasn't just about a question, or even about one man's answer. It was about truth colliding with performance, and the cracks were beginning to show. The moderator gave a small nod to the hero, almost like a silent handoff. And then, with precision, the next piece of evidence was introduced. "Senator," the hero began, their voice cutting through the chatter. "You've just claimed that your words from last year were taken out of context, but the record tells a different story. Not only did you praise the bill on camera, you also sent out a statement to your constituents, your own press release, calling it one of your proudest legislative efforts. Would you like me to read your words back to you?" The room gasped. A ripple of shock spread across the audience. The sound of papers shuffling, chairs creaking, even the faint hum of the cameras. It all seemed louder in that moment, because everyone understood what this meant. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue or a quote taken out of context. This was documented, deliberate. The politician's face tightened, his lips parted, but no words came. For a man who thrived on speeches, silence was his deadliest enemy. The narrator's voice layered in, dramatic but reflective. This is the moment when the performance collapses, when the applause lines, the smirks, the polished delivery, all of it falls away, and all that's left is the truth standing naked before the world. The hero continued, unrelenting. "These are your words, Senator. You said, and I quote, 'This bill represents the kind of bold action America needs. It may not be popular, but leadership is not about popularity. It's about principle. Do you deny issuing this statement?' The politician swallowed hard. Look, things change. Circumstances change. Leaders are allowed to evolve their views." The hero leaned forward, eyes locked. Evolve or mislead? The audience erupted. Gasps, applause, murmurs rising into a chaotic storm. The cameras captured it all, broadcasting to millions who felt as though they were sitting in that room themselves. And the narrator, turning directly to the audience, drove the point home. Do you feel that? That tension in your chest? That's the sound of accountability cutting through spin, because deep down, we all know the difference between growth and deception. Growth is humble, deception is smug. And tonight, the mask of smugness is slipping. The politician raised a finger, trying to regain control. This is exactly the problem with these forums. Instead of talking about the future, we get dragged into these so-called gotcha games. The American people don't care about what I said last year. They care about what I'm going to do now. But the words rang hollow. Because the truth was, the American people did care. They cared when leaders lied. They cared when promises shifted with the wind. And in that room, at that moment, they saw not strength, but fear. The hero spoke again, calm but firm. The American people care about trust. If a leader says one thing to win votes and another to save face, then where does that leave democracy? Where does that leave integrity? The audience thundered with applause. Some stood clapping. Others shook their heads in disbelief at the cornered politician. The narrator's tone turned almost poetic. There are moments in history where silence is louder than words. And in this chamber, that silence was deafening. Because every second he hesitated, every flicker of his eyes, told the story more honestly than his speeches ever had. The cameras zoomed in on the politician's face. The smirk was gone. The practiced confidence had evaporated. What remained was raw, unfiltered panic, something his career had trained him to hide but could not conceal now. And then the unthinkable happened. From the back of the room, a voice shouted, "Read the whole statement." The audience turned. Security tensed. But the moderator gestured for calm and nodded at the hero, as if to say, "Go ahead." And so the hero read, line by line, the press release that the politician himself had issued. Every sentence was another nail in the coffin. Every phrase another reminder that this was not spin or rumor, but his own record. By the time the reading was finished, the room was in stunned silence. The politician sat frozen, his eyes locked on the table. The narrator whispered to the viewers, "This is what it looks like when arrogance meets evidence. This is what it looks like when the truth doesn't just knock on the door, but kicks it open. And no amount of performance can save you when the receipts are in black and white." The hero placed the paper down gently. No gloating, no theatrics, just truth. The audience began to clap, first scattered, then swelling into a wave of applause that shook the chamber. And the narrator leaned in, voice heavy with anticipation. But here's the thing about waves. They don't stop at the shore. What happened in that room wasn't just the collapse of one argument. It was the spark that would ignite far beyond those walls. Because the real shock was still to come. Cliffhanger. The applause rolled like thunder. It wasn't polite, it wasn't staged. It was raw, human, and unstoppable. The sound filled the chamber, echoing down the halls like a verdict. The politician sat rigid, his knuckles white against the desk, eyes darting between the cameras and the crowd. He had lost the room. But the real battle wasn't just inside these four walls. It was already spilling out across the nation. Television anchors cut in with breaking news. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended within minutes. Trapped. Twisted truths. Exposed. Clips of the confrontation spread like wildfire, replayed over and over with commentary, analysis, and memes that stripped away what little dignity he had left. And the narrator, turning directly to the audience, framed it with clarity. This is how truth travels in the modern age. Once a scandal might take days, weeks to surface. Now, it takes seconds. And when the mask slips, the world doesn't just watch. It replays it on a loop. Back in the chamber, the hero didn't gloat. They simply sat back, letting the moment breathe. Because they knew the work was already done. The silence of the politician, the weight of his own words turned against him, spoke louder than any attack line could. The moderator cleared their throat, attempting to restore order. "Thank you, Senator. We'll now proceed to the next question." But the audience wasn't ready to move on. The energy had shifted. Every answer that came afterward was tinted with the shadow of that collapse. Each time the politician tried to speak, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Every attempt at charm was met with skepticism. The narrator cut in, reflective. This is the curse of exposure. Once people see the truth, they can't unsee it. Once the curtain is pulled back, the illusion is gone forever. And tonight, a career built on performance was torn open before millions. Later that night, news panels replayed the moment in slow motion. Analysts broke down body language, the way the politician's eyes darted, the sweat on his forehead, the pause before answering. Psychologists weighed in on fight-or-flight instincts. Even comedians turned it into material, mocking the collapse in sketches that would live online for years. But beneath the noise, something deeper was stirring. Ordinary people were talking, not just about the politician, but about what it meant. About honesty, about leadership, about whether they could trust anyone at all. The narrator's voice softened, almost intimate. And maybe that's the real story. Not the downfall of one man, but the awakening of many. Because when truth claws its way to the surface, it doesn't just expose lies. It forces all of us to confront what we believe, what we tolerate, what we demand from those who lead us. Days later, the politician held a press conference. Cameras crowded the podium, microphones reaching like hungry mouths for every word. He tried to spin, to downplay, to insist that it was all political theater, but it was too late. Reporters pressed harder. Do you deny releasing the statement? Why did you contradict your own words? Were you misleading voters, Senator? The man who once commanded the room now looked cornered, brittle. Every answer was clipped, defensive. His voice cracked under pressure, and when he finally stormed out, refusing to take more questions, the headlines wrote themselves. The narrator stepped in with gravity. This is the final unraveling. Not with a bang, not with applause, but with a whimper. Because truth, once exposed, does not retreat. It lingers, it festers, and it leaves scars that no speech can heal. The hero, meanwhile, stayed quiet. They didn't celebrate. They didn't claim victory. Because they understood something the politician never did. That truth doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everyone. And once revealed, it speaks for itself. Weeks later, polls shifted. Support crumbled. Allies distanced themselves. Donors closed their wallets. The once untouchable senator became a liability, whispered about in back rooms, mocked in late-night monologues. And the narrator, addressing the audience one last time, brought the moral full circle. So what do we take from this? That even the most powerful can be trapped by their own words. That arrogance, no matter how polished, is no shield against accountability. And that the truth, though sometimes buried, twisted, denied, always has a way of clawing its way back into the light. The camera, in your mind's eye, zooms out from the chamber, out from the flashing lights of the press conference, out from the noise of headlines, to something quieter. A living room, where a family watches the clip together. A student, replaying the moment on their phone. A worker, shaking their head at the hypocrisy. Because this wasn't just about one politician, it was about all of us. The narrator delivers the final words, strong and unshakable. Remember this moment. Remember the silence, the stumble, the unraveling. Because in the end, twisted truths may fool the crowd for a while. But when the trap closes, the truth always wins. The screen fades to black, and then the final call to action. If you believe the truth should never be silenced, share this story. Subscribe for more breakdowns, more revelations, more moments when power meets accountability. Because together, we are the jury, and the verdict is ours to give.